So, Father Greg, do you want to have a conversation about something that we have not prepared for at all?
Oh God, we're doing another video?
Yeah, just to get something in the can.
Okay. What do you got?
Well, so I had a thought.
Okay.
Inspired by a lovely board game podcast I listen to quite a bit, Secret Cabal Gaming Podcast. Yep. They talked about this quite a while ago, and I'm thinking we should have this conversation. Mm-hmm. What makes a board game a classic?
Oh.
What's happening, party people? Welcome to Punchboard Party. My name is Daniel. This is Father Greg, and we're doing a quick little discussion video for you. We like to do this every now and then. Mm-hmm. Get y'all guys all riled up.
Right.
Got some people kind of mad with our last one we did of this.
Okay.
With it was the golden age of board games.
Right.
Right. People got upset. Mm. I didn't intend to upset anybody. Just trying to have a conversation.
It's fine.
But today we're going to talk about what makes a board game a classic. Mm-hmm. You hear this term thrown around all over the place. Right. Oh, that's a classic. Oh, that's a classic. Oh, that's a classic. But what actually makes a board game a classic? In my mind, there's going to be two things I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
I say something's a classic when I like it and I haven't played it for a while. Okay. I just say, oh, that's a classic.
Okay.
But then if you're to say, what's a classic board game? Then all of a sudden different criteria are going to come into play than when I'm just kind of casually sitting around the table saying, that's a classic.
Right.
Okay, what do you think? Get us into the woods here. Get us into the weeds.
Right.
What makes a classic?
So this is a tricky thing because board gaming is a fairly recent hobby.
Yeah.
Right. And if we're talking like by the history of the world kind of, Yeah. So I might speak of like a classic piece of art being like from the 1600s. But like, I don't mean that when I say a classic board game. But I do think antiquity probably has to play some role in it. like I'll say 5 years or older, like if your game
it's
like
so arbitrary at that point. It's
I know,
so
but like there has to be some amount of years that have gone by. You can't be like Ark Nova, man. That's a classic.
But some people would fight you on that.
I'm sorry. It's too early. Like you can't. There has to be a little bit of like space to like let a game breathe and like let it see if it makes its way. I always loved. There's a podcast that maybe isn't as active as it once was, but the Long View.
Yeah.
And in the Long View, they would like their criteria was like if before you were gonna come on, like they would have random people come on to their show and just talk about a board game, but they had like specific criteria. One of those was you had to play the game like an absurd amount of times. Like if you were going to talk about whatever game, if you were going to talk about Cursed Court, you had to have played it like 100 times before they would even permit you to like set foot.
That's what I talk. That's what I call a full life right there.
That's right.
Cursed Court 100 times.
That's right. But like I think that kind of like at least that the like play count or like the time is necessary to kind of say like, this is a classic. Like it's tried, tested, and true.
Right.
That there's a sense that, and then of course, like, yes, that it's good. Now that can mean a lot of things, I think, to different people, right? Some people like classic does not necessarily have to be popular. So like, I don't think, but like sometimes like you'll say, what's a classic game? Well, Catan. Codenames, Carcassonne. Why? Because they've sold millions of copies.
Right.
Whereas like I don't necessarily think it has to have sold that much, but maybe there is like, I don't know, could you say Gizia is a classic? Like could you like say a game that like nobody's played or like that, just kind of like a hidden gem? Like does that qualify as a classic if like nobody's heard about it?
Yeah. I think we run into the problem here where there is a myriad of criteria for what a classic is.
Right.
And a game has to meet some, probably like more than not of that criteria. Mm-hmm. So say there's 10 items on that criteria list. The board game has to make about 5 or 6 of them to then fit. But I want to go back to something here. I want to go back to Ark Nova. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I want to go back to Classic.
Right.
Well, look, I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to be as honest as you possibly can.
I guarantee I will be.
Do you have any doubt in your mind that Ark Nova will not be a classic at some point? According to how we kind of classify games right now, is there any doubt in your mind that Ark Nova will not be on that list of classic board games?
Like, it'll be in, like, the Board Game 100 for a long time. sure of that. Like,
is that enough to make it a classic?
I don't know if I would consider Ark Nova a classic. For me, I would consider probably Terraforming Mars to be a classic, just as like its predecessor. Like, I would be like, Ark Nova took what Terraforming Mars did, and I would say even made it better.
Interesting. Yeah.
But like, for me, Terraforming Mars would be the classic. It's like Fury of Dracula and Fury of Dracula 3rd edition or 4th edition.
Yeah. So okay, so a classic board game, one of the criteria that it needs to break ground. Okay?
I think so, yeah.
So we're saying it has to break ground. We're also saying that it has to be around for a while, prove its mettle. What else are we saying then? Because I think the point I'm trying to make about Ark Nova is that if there's a game that we could say,
right,
like it's brand new, but we could say that's definitely going to be a classic, then what's keeping us from saying that it is a classic?
Right now.
We're just waiting for it to age a few years before we're comfortable saying that it's a classic.
That's an interesting question, because I think, like, the way that BGG kind of ratings are structured is, like, there's not really, like an upkeep to the board game ratings. In other words, I can rate a game a 10 and never log into Board Game Geek again, and that's just going to stay as a 10 rating forever, right? There's never, Board Game Geek's never going to be like, hey, you have to reassess your rating, otherwise we're kicking you off the site or something, right? So, like, there is this kind of sense in which a lot of times, like, ratings won't change that much, right? Like, I don't know, Twilight Struggle is, like, still pretty high up. I don't know where it is on that list, but, like, probably it shouldn't be that high. But, like, there's probably just this bunch of people who still, like, have rated it 10 and just never, like, switch their opinion of it.
That's right. But I would say that a criteria for a classic game is that it's ranked highly on the Board Game Geek rankings at some point.
Right.
You know, I think that's fair enough, but I think there's plenty of games that have gotten very high that I still hesitate to call a classic.
For sure. That's what I mean, yeah. Like,
so I hesitate to call Through the Ages a classic.
Okay, yeah.
But a lot of people, I think, would be tempted to call it a classic.
Right.
But I think the thing that holds me back from calling it a classic is that there's Civilization games that come before it that have paved the way for that particular game. And so it does what it does really well, but it's not necessarily...
Right, a certain degree of innovation or, like, say, groundbreaking kind of... I do think you're right, is a little bit necessary. I don't think, I would call Through the Ages. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I would call it a classic board game, at least.
Yeah, so it is an interesting kind of wishy-washy... Because, again, around the table, someone brings out Brass. I say, oh, that's a classic.
That's right.
But now we start talking about, okay, what's the criteria of a classic game? Brass gets close for me to say, yeah, that's a classic board game.
Right, especially if we're talking about old Brass. Like, I think Brass, Lancashire, and Birmingham, as much as they continue, like, the legacy of Brass kind of, like, can fit into that. But, yeah, if somebody was like, Brass Birmingham, now that's a classic game. I guess it probably is 5 years older now, for sure. But, like, I'd be like, okay, I get, like, Brass. I get, like, the whole history of Brass. As an endeavor, I might be willing to say that's a classic. Yeah. Like, Brass Birmingham specifically? I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would say that. I think I could say that.
Like,
so, yeah, I think the age kind of comes in there, right? It says, this has been around for a while. Just it's old.
Right.
And that gives it some sort of something. Because classic also, you think about classic literature, for instance, it has a kind of, it has a vibe or a feel or like the way that they tell the stories has a classic feel, right? So
that's right.
So like the newer hobby board games have a different feel than the older hobby board games. And so I'm less likely to call the newer ones classic because they don't have that classic feel. Right.
That's right. You might pull out a copy of the old Raw and be like, "Oh, that looks classic."
Yes.
But like, you might pull out the new Raw with tool art and be like, "Is this classic?" I mean, looks good. Just looks like modern.
Yeah, that's right. Although tool
that's
art.
right.
Yeah, he's a knack for me.
His art does look kind of classic. Right.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. What's a game for you that you like? You would die on that hill to say that this is a classic game.
I think certainly something like Carcassonne for me. That's like that would be a perennial classic, like a game that I can pull out anytime. It's old. It's like it's been through the ringer.
Yeah.
But like it's good. Like somebody wants to tell me Carcassone's not good. I will die on that hill. Yeah. Something like Ticket to Ride. That's a classic.
Because classics almost conflate with evergreens.
Sure.
I think there's a lot of crossover between those two categories there.
Right. I think if something's a classic, it's going to be something that you're going to want to... I mean, does a classic need to be brought out a bunch? Maybe not. Yeah. Maybe you can have maybe Twilight Imperium can be a classic, even though you only play it like once every 3 years. Right. But like...
Interesting. Yeah.
So
like a game that I desperately would want to say is a classic, but I don't think it's proven the test of time, is Five Tribes.
Okay.
I want to say the Five Tribes is a classic.
Right.
Because it has some innovative mechanisms. Mm-hmm. It has that classic feel, like it's still in that kind of old school Euro vein. But it hasn't quite stayed at the sort of... It hasn't rode the wave for as long as other games have.
It's not a game that you see people playing today. It's not like I can go into a Essen Spiel and see just Five Tribes.
Yeah, so there's
Five Tribes at a table.
There's another requirement, right? The game has to still be in
circulation,
in high demand. And enough people play Five Tribes. It's still on people's lists, and people still play it, but it doesn't have that same Terraforming Mars, Brass Birmingham, kind of thing. It's fun, right? Yeah, it's interesting. So I think we're leaning kind of a little bit. We'd give you less passes, I think, than other people might.
For sure. I'm going to be pretty strict on my definition of classic.
Because now we're thinking about classics, right? Like when I'm thinking about literature, it's like Plato.
Like Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare, right?
Yeah,
like
you got your kind of canon. I think, we're going to be pretty tough.
Right, I think if 90% of the board games in your collection, you're all like, oh, these are all classics, like, you need to think about a new word.
Yeah. These are good games.
That's right.
But they're not classics. Well, that's interesting. Okay, party people, what do you say? How do you determine what a classic board game is? And what are some of the classics that you're saying, no, you guys are wrong, these are classics? What are classic board games to you, party people? Party people, if you enjoyed this little conversation, you can submit a video idea to us. It can be a top 10 list. It can be a discussion topic. It can be just some kind of fun game challenge that you want us to do. If you have kind of quizzes and things that you want to submit for us to do, please do that. You can do that at punchboardparty@gmail.com. And you can submit your video ideas, quizzes, games, whatever, to that. And we will try and put your idea and bring it to fruition. So, party people, if you like this video, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, all that YouTube stuff. Until next time, party people.
Have a classic day. That's too easy.
It's too easy.
Too easy.